Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 217. We have some new news on the estate front, and it looks like the battle for the compensation fund and what the parameters were going to be has been finalized, and they have come to an agreement for the fund to be active starting June 15th. And now it's a voluntary fund, meaning that the survivors can opt in or opt out at any time. And it's also the beginning of justice in this case, in my opinion. Now, of course, like everything else, the devil is in the details. So let's jump into the article from the Daily Mail and see what the article has to say about Jeffrey Epstein's estate and the compensation fund for the survivors. This article was authored by Daniel Bates. The headline, Exclusive. Compensation fund for Jeffrey Epstein survivors is approved with no limit on how much each can get from his $634 million estate, but they must give up the right to sue Ghislaine Maxwell or other co-conspirators. Now, on its face, that sounds horrendous, right? Give up the ability to sue Ghislaine Maxwell or other co-conspirators? Well, that only means suing them in civil court, right? At the end of the day, the real fortune was held by Jeffrey Epstein. If you're going to go after an amount of money and go after somebody in civil court, well, that would be Jeffrey Epstein's estate. Now, you would go after Ghislaine Maxwell. Of course, you would go after everybody that you possibly could if they took part in your abuse. So you would go after Ghislaine Maxwell as well, but I would think that the goal in going after Ghislaine Maxwell in a civil case would be more to get her to discovery phase. That way you can use whatever you learn there in a criminal case. So while it's all rather confusing, what I take from the headline here is they can't sue any of the co-conspirators for financial reasons. They can't go after them and look for them to give them money as far as in a civil suit, but it doesn't preclude them from working with law enforcement and to continue in the pursuit of anyone who was a co-conspirator within Jeffrey Epstein's criminal enterprise. Let's see if the article sheds any more light on that. The compensation fund for Jeffrey Epstein survivors has been officially approved with no limit on how much each survivor can get. I think that's pretty important too, because what these survivors have went through and the journey that they have been on, I think that the whole entire estate needs to get chopped up and pieced off to these ladies. I've been of that opinion since I started covering this case and I started understanding the nuances of it and started really digging deep. I knew right away that this was not your normal kind of case where there are people just looking for handouts, people looking to try and sue some rich guy. I knew that this was not the case right from the jump. And when you dig in just a little bit, you understand right away this is something completely different. And what these survivors went through, these girls, all of them, right? All of them. I don't care their age. Any one of these girls who was abused by these disgusting animals deserves their piece of the pie, and that piece of the pie should be very big for all of them. I don't want to see anyone else get any money out of this estate. I don't even, the creditors perhaps are the only people that might have any stake to anything that's left over, but as far as Indike and Khan and his brother, they shouldn't get one single cent from this estate. And furthermore, I think that Indike and Khan should be under investigation. The late pedophile's victims will be able to put in their claim for a stake of a $634 million estate on June 15th when the program is set up. But to do so, women will have to give up their right to sue Epstein's alleged co-conspirators. So they won't be able to take them to court. For instance, Virginia won't be able to take Ghislaine Maxwell or Prince Andrew to court civilly to try and sue them if she gets into the compensation fund, right? But that does not mean they can't go after them criminally. This doesn't provide that kind of umbrella. This doesn't provide that sort of protection. This is only financial protection. They will also have to provide proof of their allegation and anything to corroborate it to make their claim as strong as possible. That will not be hard for any of these girls, right? We've seen what has occurred. We've seen the evidence. We've seen the receipts. We know that Maria Farmer and Annie contacted the FBI and the police and were ignored. We know that nobody paid attention to Michelle. We know nobody paid attention to Courtney. We know nobody paid attention to Virginia. And we know that they all have ample amount of evidence to back up their claims and corroborating witnesses and statements, etc., etc. So if those are the parameters, I want to see all of these ladies get a nice, gigantic, fat chunk of change so that if they decide they want to ride off to the sunset with both middle fingers extended at society, they have the ability to do so. They have earned that much. In another controversial provision, even the women who recruited for Epstein can make a claim so long as there is a credible basis they acted under duress. I don't really dig that, to be honest with you, because you're going to have all of the core four try and use that as an excuse. And while they may try and do that here in the civil portion of the case, I highly doubt the court is going to feel the same about people like Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, etc., etc. Now, the two that I've always said would get different treatment, in my opinion, are Haley Robson and Nadia Marcinkova because of the circumstances that brought them within Jeffrey Epstein's atmosphere and how they were groomed from a very young age to be involved. Now, Marcinkova is probably a little bit of a different situation for me, as I've stated in the past, considering she was so close to Epstein. Even after she became an adult and even after Epstein died, she hasn't come forward, whereas Haley Robson has come out and told everything that she knows, it would seem, right? And that she also, when she was young in the original investigation, was involved in being a part of building the case. So I think that Haley Robson and Nadia Marcinkova, to a certain degree, have to be dealt with in a different manner. But the rest of them, I don't want to see any of these psychos trying to use this as an excuse. 70 women have indicated they want to take part in the compensation scheme and could get millions of dollars each. Among them is Maria Farmer, who alleges that Epstein, who hanged himself in his cell last August while awaiting sex trafficking charges, allegedly, sexually assaulted her in 1996 at his ranch in Ohio. Yeah, you know what? There's no allegation at this point. All right? It's either do you believe what Maria is saying or do you believe Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell? It's really not a difficult choice, folks, especially considering how open Maria has been, how forward she has been, and how brave she has been to come forward again after being ignored the first time around. So why would anyone not believe what Maria Farmer has to say about these two sick monsters? She recently revealed she is battling Hodgkin's lymphoma, and other survivors set up a GoFundMe to raise money for her. Yeah, and the GoFundMe that the survivors have put in place for Maria has raised a ton of money, and it's been really crucial in Maria getting the health care that she needs. You know, it's sad because the state should be helping out, right? You would think that things would be streamlined for somebody with cancer. There wouldn't be too many hurdles to jump. But once again, in the Western world as a whole, if you're poor, forget about it. But the GoFundMe that was set up by Virginia and some of the other survivors and Virginia's the couple of charities, et cetera, it's been amazing for Maria and for what it's done for her. It's just incredible. Everybody out there, all of you listening and everybody following this case, you've all just been an amazing community in regards to people like Maria coming forward and speaking, because it's very difficult, and I know for a fact it was difficult for Maria because her and I we've discussed it before she came public per se. We talked about how difficult of a decision it was for her, but being somebody like she is, built the way she is, with the character that she has, she was not going to sit back and be quiet when something like this was going on. She blew the whistle in 96, and then she blew it again on these fools. So all of these brave women who came forward, Maria and everybody after her, they all deserve a gigantic chunk of change from this. The formal order was signed off by Carolyn P. Herman Purcell, a magistrate judge of the Superior Court of the Virgin Islands. It will be overseen by 3 experts in large compensation schemes, including Kenneth Feinberg, who ran the one for victims of the September 11th attacks. So I'm not too familiar with his work in the September 11th attacks and how that compensation was doled out. I never really followed that aspect of September 11th, but I'm going to go back obviously now and take a closer look and see a little bit, see if I could look a little bit deeper into how Feinberg conducted himself throughout all of that to try and get an idea about how he will administer this fund moving forward. They will also consult with Professor Marcy Hamilton, a nationally recognized sexual abuse expert, to evaluate each woman's claims. And this was a sticking point that the estate did not want anything to do with. So this is definitely a win for the survivors that they have this doctor on the panel, Marcy Hamilton, to help, navigate these waters, because this is difficult stuff, right? What, we're going to rely on Darren Indike and Khan to be the ones who navigate us through these waters? They're going to captain us through this maelstrom? Yeah, no thanks. The court documents state that the program is independent of the estate and is voluntary, so participants can withdraw at any time. There is no cap or limitation on the aggregate amount of funds available to compensate all eligible claimants, or on the amount of compensation to be made to each individual claimant, the document states. The women have a 9-month window after the program commences on June 15th to stake their claim. But even if the claim was outside the statute of limitations, they can take part. And it seems that there have been a lot of concessions made to the survivors in this fund. Now, of course, it would have been nice if they could have sued everybody, because at the end of the day, that means they could have been brought to discovery, right? And that would be fantastic. And for people covering the case, that would be a treasure trove of information. But at the end of the day, all that really matters is what these survivors believe is right for themselves. Not what I think, not what you think, not what anybody else thinks. Each one of them will have to sit down with their counsel, sit down with their family, and decide how to proceed. And if they decide to take part in this compensation fund, that's their decision. And every one of them has their own motivations. Each and every one of these survivors is a unique person with their own story. So I'll tell you what, it's nice to see at the very least there's some movement here to validate these survivors by Jeffrey Epstein's people. It's the first step before indictments, in my opinion, because it's important to remember that this deal does not make it so that if they accept the money, they cannot speak to the authorities about what occurred. It only means that they can't go after these people, co-conspirators, in a civil manner. Women who are recruited for the pedophile can participate where there is a credible basis to determine that the individual acted under duress as a result of her own sexual abuse by Epstein, provided that other eligibility criteria are met. And obviously that's where we get down into the nuances of the agreement, and we'll have to see more before we can analyze it, right? But from the outside looking in, that looks like a provision that was added specifically for people like Haley Robson so that she can go after the estate as well with her own claim. Now, again, that's just what it looks like from the outside. We don't have all of the details, right? We haven't seen all of the details yet, so we can't have a full-on, analysis, but that's what it looks like to me from here, that this provision was added for people specifically like Haley Robson. So we'll see going forward what occurs in that realm of this story, but I really believe that that's what we're going to see here. The survivors will get more money if they are able to provide documents corroboration, or other evidence to back up their claims. Other factors include the length of the abuse, the frequency, and the age of the survivor at the time. You know, I don't know how they come up with these determinations on what the parameters will be, but what I will say is this: I don't know about age being, a huge parameter here. Abuse is abuse. Obviously, anything that happens to children is just beyond the pale, and just the worst thing that can possibly occur, in my opinion, is abusing children. But I think that anyone who was abused by Jeffrey Epstein, I think that their stories matter as well, even if they were older or, above the age of consent, because they've been left with just misery like you couldn't believe, no matter their age. But I think that when it comes to crimes against children, I think they're on just a different level, right? It's just a different level of crime, and I can see why the parameters would be a little bit different here. And if you're a child, 15, 16 years old, and you're abused by these people, well, your burden is just incredibly, incredibly heavy. So I guess I could see how they would use that as a parameter, and it does make sense, right? But it doesn't, anyone who's been abused by Epstein, I don't care their age, I'm very clear about this, deserves a huge chunk of change from this madman and his disgusting friends at his estate. The most difficult part of the process for the survivors will be deciding whether to give up their right to sue Epstein's alleged co-conspirators. To get compensation, they have to sign a release which will indemnify not just the estate, but related entities and or related individuals from further civil litigation. That appears to include Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's alleged madam, co-conspirator, who earlier in the day stayed her own lawsuit against his estate for failing to pay her legal bills. Now, again, that means that they can't, if they accept money from this fund, they can't try and sue Ghislaine Maxwell on top of accepting money from this fund. But it does not mean they can't go after her in criminal court still. However, the release does not stop the women from talking with law enforcement agents, meaning they can assist with the ongoing FBI inquiry into Epstein's associates. That is a big deal in my opinion, and that's the slammer for me. If it was, I'm looking at this from the outside looking in, right? But in my opinion, it's not like Ghislaine Maxwell has a fortune like Jeffrey Epstein did, or even Prince Andrew, or any of these other people besides maybe like Glenn Dubin or Les Wexner. Now, if you're going to go after their money as well, then I guess, a whole different ballgame. But when it comes to like Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew, as far as not being able to sue them civilly, I don't really think, in my opinion, I don't know. I don't think it really would stop me personally from being part of the fund. As long as I could go after them criminally still would be the most important thing for me, because the bulk of the wealth, the bulk of the money is going to be found within Jeffrey Epstein's estate anyway. So I think that provision is very important, and I think that it's going to be a bit an enticement to a lot of these survivors who are still looking to help law enforcement, but at the same time deserve to be compensated for what they've been through. So again, I believe that that's a very, very important provision, and from the outside looking in, I think that it's going to be a point of enticement for a lot of survivors. Anyone who has not already filed a claim through their lawyer can do so via a website, EpsteinVCP.com, the documents say. As well as being able to speak to law enforcement, survivors will be able to speak publicly about their allegations if they choose to. Bam, so that's important too. Now that means the survivors can go on and write books, they can start their own shows, they can, the sky's the limit. They own their story still. And for me, that has always been the thing I always feared the most in this case, them not owning their story after the compensation fund was put into place. So if the survivors want to tell their story after they've been involved in this compensation fund, they are free to do so. And I think, again, that's another huge, important part of this fund. and I think that it's a great provision, and I'm really glad to see that it was added. The documents state that through the program, the estate wishes to acknowledge the wrongs endured by victims, survivors, and offer them an opportunity to voluntarily resolve their individual claims for such sexual abuse. Let's read that again for everybody in the back. So let's talk about validation for these survivors. Finally, somebody is accepting and acknowledging the wrongdoings of Jeffrey Epstein in regards to these survivors. Let's read it again because it's that important. The documents state that through the program, the estate wishes to acknowledge the wrongs endured by victims and survivors and offer them an opportunity to voluntarily resolve their individual claims for such sexual abuse. How about that, folks? How about that? Finally, somebody acknowledging what occurred. So now, Mr. Berman, that they've acknowledged it civilly, you think you can get moving on, your end of the road? Do you think you can get things moving criminally a little bit? That would be nice. Any survivor allegation must be against Epstein, not his co-conspirators. Claimants can make representations via video conference with the administrator if they think it will help their case. With no sign of Maxwell or other alleged co-conspirators being arrested, the scheme represents for now the best shot at restitution for Epstein survivors, some of whom have been seeking justice for decades. And I agree, this is the first step. This is the first step, and you see it right there with them acknowledging the wrongdoing of Jeffrey Epstein and the estate. First step, folks. Now think back to where we were right after Jeffrey Epstein died. Think about how muddy the waters were. Think about how difficult it was to put two and two together because there was so much crazy information coming out. And now, take a look at where we have come. Dubin, he's out. Wexner, he's out. Prince Andrew, see you later, buddy. You're no longer welcome in the public eye. And the list goes on and on and on. For the people who were involved with Jeffrey Epstein, they have all begun to suffer the blowback. Now, of course, it's not indictments, but it's a start, right? It's starting to break the image that they have built for themselves, these so-called members of polite society, these so-called elites. They've wrapped themselves up in their charitable givings. They've wrapped themselves up in their associations with other powerful people, and they use that to defend themselves when their disgusting deeds are unearthed for the world to see. But now, Jeffrey Epstein's estate has acknowledged that these girls, these survivors, that their claims are valid, that what occurred to them happened, and that the Epstein estate better get ready to pay out, as we would say in the Bronx, the fazools. Because the Brinks truck is about to back up, finally, for these survivors. If you'd like to contact me, you could do that at Bobbycapucci at protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI at protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, we'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do it all over again.